Can you imagine your life where money is your friend, working with you to achieve all your dreams and desires? If you struggle seeing money as your friend, then join Kathy Cook Noble, financial advisor and educator on understanding how your money can work for you. It is possible. Now, here is Financially Speaking with Kathy Cook Noble.
Good afternoon and welcome to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network. I'm your host, Kathy Cook Noble, and every week we get together and we dissect and discuss and sometimes argue about different financial concepts that people are confused about or intimidated by or just need some clarification on. And what we do here on Financially Speaking is we just take that and we break it into everyday language because like I always tell everybody, you 100% can understand your own stuff. It's not necessary for you to understand what's going on with your family, your friends, your neighbors, what's happening on Facebook and what you think is happening in their life. What matters is that you understand your own stuff, and you definitely can do that. So that's what we do here every week. And on the Inspired Choices Network, we take a holistic approach. And my little part of the world is the financial part, but the other hosts are wonderful experts on their topics of relationships or business or coaching or anything else that you're looking for. So I encourage you to plug yourself in, and don't forget to download the app because it's absolutely free. You can be with us all the time. So if you're not listening to it live, you're certainly welcome to join us in the recording part of our podcast, which is on over 200 platforms. Or you might even be looking at us because we're now on TV. So that's kind of cool too. So download the app. It's absolutely free for Androids and for iPhones. And every once in a while on our show, we get some guests, and I'm going to jump right in because I have to.
Well, it sounds very good. Thanks for having me.
I am like this. I have to confess a little bit. Tonight is a real treat for me because we have a real live Wall Street titan who has really spent a remarkable career, like just beautiful career when you read about it, and has just got an amazing story to share with us with his new book. So I'm going to jump in and introduce my very, very special guest, Ed Hajim, and welcome to the show, Ed. It's so wonderful to have you here tonight.
Nice to be here, and thanks for inviting me. Look forward to having some fun.
My pleasure, for sure. For people who don't know, I'm going to just give a tiny background, Ed, and then I'm going to let you jump in and tell your story because it is something truly that Hollywood hasn't come up with a story like this. And that's one of my questions is if they are going to have a story like this, maybe based on your life.
So Sean Connery died, so we're having a little trouble with the leading man. So.
Oh, see, and I could see that he would have been great. I have a Sean Connery story for you then that you'll find kind of interesting. So Ed was at the age of 3 and he was kidnapped by his father. He was driven cross country in the United States, and he was told by his father that his mother had passed. He pressed his face against the car window. He watched the miles pass, and he had no way of knowing at that very tender age where his life was going to take him. And that's the part of the story I'm going to leave for Ed to tell the rest, because this is one of those stories that could go in any direction. And you, in your book, Ed, you quote one of my favorite poems about the road less traveled, and you took the road less traveled in so many ways. So I'm excited to hear from you. Please share your little bit of background there, and we'll talk about your life experiences on Wall Street, how you overcame all this adversity. You've really, the mental ability that you have to be able to handle this, I think is extremely impressive and encouraging and inspirational on so many levels. So share with us a little bit about your story and your book that you just now published.
Well, my book was something that I was never going to do. At age 18, leaving the final orphanage, I decided I was going to bury my background forever. And when I got to be 75 or so, my wife and my daughter and my sons said, we've got to put this on paper. And I finally attempted it. And I was going to just print a book for, 100 family and friends. And I sent the galleys out. I just got an enormous return saying, this is something that every freshman in every college ought to read, or every senior in high school. So I went forward. It took me 7 years to write. I have 2 other manuscripts, which I'm hoping to come out with. But just to take what Kathy said and capture this life of mine, which I almost don't believe. And by the way, I had a great deal of difficulty writing about what Kathy was talking about because it was a very difficult thing. My daughter actually wrote the first draft, and we I basically luckily kept every letter that my father wrote me. And when he died, I had a box and basically had every letter that I wrote him. So we had some pretty good, information. You find when you write a book, you first of all have to communicate what you want to communicate, but you also got to recognize the reader has to be able to read exactly what you want to talk about. And so, putting these two things together and separating facts from what you remember was very important. Anyway, Dad lost all his money in 29. He came as an immigrant, did extremely well. And by 29, he had everything. In fact, in the book, you'll see he's pictured next to his airplane, which was very unusual in those days. 29, 33 took everything, including his mother. Mother died during that period. He was very close to his mother, much closer to his mother than his father. And in 1933, as he told me, he said, I had a decision between committing suicide and driving to California. And he decided to drive to California. Thank God for that, or I wouldn't be here. And on the way, he stopped at a cousin's house, totally unwelcome, because in 1933, nobody wanted to see anybody because everybody was extremely poor, was in the middle of the horrible depression. And after being there for 2 weeks, he shockingly fell in love with the fifth of their 6 children, an 18-year-old young lady. And they got married, which was, he had a car, he was very good looking, and she wanted to get out of the house because it wasn't a comfortable place. And off they went to California. And things went from bad to worse. And after 3 years, the only real happiness, according to my father, was that I was born in 1936. And then mother and dad just didn't get along. He was, if you're a reader of Julian Urus, he resembled the Hajj, the fellow named Abraham. It was his way or the highway. He had unusual eating habits. He was very difficult. He wouldn't let my mother work. And in 1939, given the fact that she was a very strong woman, she just got to get divorced. And nobody got divorced in those days. Got divorced, got complete custody, legal custody of me, and drove me from Los Angeles to St. Louis. And he got visiting rights on Sunday and $5 a week of alimony and child support. And he arrived at his first visit and found that I was so-called unkept and put me in his car. And instead of taking me to a movie or a playground, he drove me to California. And as Kathy said, he kidnapped me, basically. A few weeks later, or some period later, he told me my mother had passed away and I would never see her again. Being 3 years old, what did I know? What did that mean? Anyway, at that point in time, he was a merchant marine and had to go to sea. So for the next 2 years, we spent about half time together, and we were real buddies. It was fun. And but I spent half the time with a neighbor lady named Mrs. Benson. And when the war broke out, though, he was drafted or he volunteered to become an officer in a merchant marine fleet as a radio operator. And essentially, I was put in foster homes, Catholic foster homes. And during the entire war period, I didn't see him. And I ended up in 5 Catholic foster homes. Either he wasn't paying the bills or I was an extremely difficult kid. And a couple of my report cards from the Catholic school said, Eddie's a smart boy, but he's so mischievous, we really can't tell. And I guess I was, a troublemaker. After the war ended, I ended up at first foster home was terrible, really out of a Dickinsonian almost. But by the final foster home, the 5th one, was actually quite good. I only spent 6 months there. They were lovely people. But my father wanted me back, and I flew across country again. He had a good gift of gab, so I was able to talk to airlines and flying a 10-year-old on a DC-10 back to New York in those days, 5 stops. And I got to New York, and he was still quite an angry man. We spent the summer in the YMCA on 34th Street, and I, half the time by myself because he was looking for land-based work. Come September, we moved to Coney Island to a hotel, and I went to school there for a year. It was a good year for me. School worked out very well. I enjoyed the school, but it was not good for my father. He had to go back to sea. And actually that summer, you'll find the book that there was a period of time, 3 or 4 weeks, where I actually spent by myself alone in New York in that hotel, which was quite an experience. But being a 10-year-old or 11-year-old in those days was somewhat different than it is today. And so he had to put me in an orphanage, and I reported to an orphanage in Far Rockaway. Spent 3 or 4 years there, and I aged out of there. And my father disappeared when I got to be 15 years old. So I became a ward of the state, and then ended up in another orphanage in Yonkers, New York, which was a real break. The orphanage in Far Rockaway had the 50 of us in one room. And when I went to the orphanage in Yonkers, there was only 3 of us, 3 boys in one room. And it was 4 blocks from a fantastic high school, Theodore Roosevelt High School, public high school. And I guess in my sophomore year, I decided the ticket out of this situation was private college. And so I put my head down. I was a varsity athlete. I did very well in math and science, and I got an NRTC scholarship to the University of Rochester. I'll stop there. You can visualizing it at my grammar school graduation from PS 104 in Far Rockaway. No one showed up. I have no siblings whatsoever, no aunts, no uncles. My father was at sea. And then my high school graduation, the same thing. He didn't show up for my high school graduation. He was at sea, and I had nobody basically there to. It was a tough situation, and it built in a bit of anger in my body. But overall, looking back, and that's what's good about the book, is these disadvantages I just described, and they're more vividly described in the book, basically became advantages. I mean, if you spend 15 or 20, in the first 18 years, if you spend yourself in 15 or 20 different places, you develop adaptability. You understand change. You seek change. In fact, I always kid about this, but you go from one Catholic schoolyard to another one, you sure as heck learn how it is to adjust. You learn out who you can beat up and who beats up you, and just how to get along. I did that 15 or 20 times in the first 18 years. So in my business life, when change came, whatever it had to be, whether changing firms or changing jobs or just making a change, it was relatively easy for me. And also you develop resilience. Resilience is like a muscle. If you use it a lot, which I did as a child, you gain it. You gain perseverance. You gain, self-reliance. Since you're all alone, you have to rely on yourself, and you learn how to do that. And then I guess most importantly, you become a person who basically there's nothing you can't overcome. And of course, everything in life is always a little bit better. You go from a place where there are 50 kids in a room to 3 kids in a room. When I got to college, my first year was terrible, but there were only 2 of us in the room, and the food was better, and everything was better for me at college than it was ever in my life. So things continue to improve, and I've been very lucky in that case. I could stop right there before we get to the rest of the life, but basically I got to the University of Rochester. It was very bumpy. I had black leather jacket and all the wrong clothes, and the only thing I had was an NRTC scholarship. And those days, rushing at fraternities was the first week, and I got rejected by all the fraternities. I look different, I act different, but most importantly, when I try to get across to foster kids when I talk to them, I'm doing a lot of talking to foster kids and kids from orphanages, is you feel differently. You got to get over that, because you aren't much different than those other kids. Maybe they had a little different life. They learned to ride a bicycle or swim or whatever else you didn't, but you're really the same. And by my sophomore year, I was off and running, and I can describe my college life with, I flourished. I really flourished, but I didn't tell anybody about my background. A little bit of denial really helps, because it cut out a lot of conversation. It cut a lot of explanation out. My father was a merchant marine. We lived in a post office box in San Francisco. My mother died when I was 3. End of conversation. And I wouldn't go any further than that. Of course, one of my girlfriends said, "You're awfully dark." Well, but that was kind of maybe good in that respect. Girls kind of like guys who are a little dark. So I got along pretty well. I'll stop there, Kathy. My daughter who works for TED Talks always says, "Ed, you answer the questions too long, and give somebody else a chance to ask you questions, which is probably more important." So Kathy, I'm gonna turn it back to you.
Ed, I can totally understand, because your story is so amazing. And honestly, I could just listen to you and I wouldn't have any problem at all having to have to be on the other end. I'm thrilled to hear your story live. Your book is beautifully written. And I remember the part when you said about your daughter having to have to write that part for you, and dealing with that, because that is difficult. We're going to take our first break of the night, but when we come back, I want to ask you, because you stated like it was so easy to do. A lot of people could wallow in any number of different situations that you went through, and could have turned to drugs and alcohol and a whole different kind of lifestyle that you chose not to do. And you made a very deliberate, conscious decision to get yourself, that was your way out, to go to college. And you made a very conscious decision to do that and get the grades, where you see and hear a lot of stories where people don't, and they go through these very dark, self mutilating almost.
No, you have to turn the anger toward being successful. rather than turning it externally on other people. I turned the
Absolutely.
anger that I had on, I'm going to be successful, but also I had other help. My father, regardless of he abandoned me 3 times, he still, in his letters and in his conversations, always supported me. I was always the greatest. The nuns at the Catholic school, they showed me that if you were good, you did okay. If you weren't so good, you didn't do okay. You know, the movies in those days, it was very different in those days. The movies, the good guys always won. You know,
That's right.
John Wayne, you know, or even Jimmy Stewart, they always won. And so that Saturday afternoon was a, you know, you said, that's what I want to do. I want to be that kind of ride off into the sunset, you know, and that helped an awful lot. And then, of course, you know, we're going to a high school where, in case Theodore Roosevelt in those days had 80% of the kids were going to private colleges. I had examples, you know, and I had a lot of, you know, I wouldn't listen to many people in those days because I was very self-reliant, but I was in that mix. And the girls that I dated at high school and I on the basketball team, those guys, you know, they all going to try to go to a private college, and that was the answer. And that's why I'm a zealot on education. It's the solution to almost everything or everything.
You speak my language on that. I love school. And my mom always, even this week, she's like, I thought you'd be done school by this age. And I said, I did too, but I don't think you ever finished school. So
lifelong learning. It's absolutely the same,
lifelong.
more now than ever before.
Absolutely. And you can learn so much faster. It feels like it's almost hard to keep up, but we're going to take our first break. Do not go anywhere. We have Ed with us for the entire night. We are going to be back in just a few minutes, so don't go anywhere. You're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network. We'll be right back.
Too many of us get caught up in the unreal lives of reality television and complete to acquire stuff, which is setting us up to accumulate lots of debt. We're scared, confused, and don't know who to talk to. By tuning into Financially Speaking radio show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble, you'll learn tips you can use to improve your financial health, which in turn can improve your overall health and make for a very happy life. Live a life you can afford and enjoy. It is possible. Listen for Financially Speaking radio show every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is the Financially Speaking Show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble. To participate in the program, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email by sending to Kathy@bookkeepplus.ca. Now back to the program.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network. I'm your host, Kathy Cook Noble, and we have a very special gift tonight because we have Ed Hajim with us, who is former Wall Street financial guru. He just wrote a book about his past, and I want to talk to you about Wall Street. And I have to admit, I'm just a little bit starstruck because I've been to Wall Street, being a big fan of the financial industry and watching, you know, the different financial programs and reading the books, and it's just an energy down there that I thought is different than anything else I've ever seen or felt. So I want to ask you, you know, how you feel about Wall Street now and the changes with the way the world's moving in terms of different kinds of cryptocurrencies and NFTs and all this new stuff that's happening. Do you still stay active with? I know you're still chairman of your company, and I suspect, having had a few minutes talking to you, that you're very active and keeping up to date and learning new things all the time. And the rate of change that we see happening with information today is incredible. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on all this social media
I mean,
how
you're right on. In fact, as we basically have, it's a more difficult process than it's ever been because of all the things you just enumerated. The rate of change is greater than it's ever been. There's much more less human and more machine involvement. There's, the international market is wide open. When I started in the business, the commissions were 25 cents a share. I was one of two people that went to the mutual fund industry in 1964. And when I went to a company, instead of it being, starting to pry out answers, they opened up the books and showed me exactly what was going to happen. It's a totally different experience. And you could find a trend and, buy a stock and, 6 months later would come home, wouldn't be next morning. There wasn't you look at oil, you get $10 a barrel. This is $1 trillion commodity. It moves in 2 days. So it's a very different market today. I was very lucky because I've actually touched all the bases. And that's one thing I wrote this book about. I was an analyst. I was a portfolio manager, president of a mutual fund company. I ran an institutional business. I ran an entire, brokerage business. Then I became a CEO and a chairman of a small investment bank, which was the greatest experience of all. And for nearly almost 20 years, I grew that bank, and I therefore got involved in all of the processes, which the most important process, which you've already mentioned, is change. If I didn't change that firm almost every year toward the right direction, we'd be out of business. The same thing with portfolios today, although we still should recognize that over the long term, there still is a long-term process that stocks and certain kinds of fixed income securities still will allow you to overcome inflation. And that's because I went into the mutual fund business in 1964 when the largest mutual fund was only $1 billion. I went to a little company in California called Capital Research, which had only had $350 million under management, and then only had 15 people. Now they're 2 trillion. Now you can see that I'm a smart guy. I should have stayed there and never moved, but it was a different path for me. I had to go out and fool around and I've had so many jobs over the past 50 years that people wonder whether I have a trouble keeping a job. But as you go through the book, you'll see each time that I changed, there was a good reason. The only non-good reason for leaving was Capital Research. I actually made a mistake there. I spun myself off into my own mutual fund. It was a joint venture. Joint ventures are always very difficult. I made some big mistakes. That's the only place I really left that I hadn't done a good job. The other places, there are other reasons. And I can go into those. Kathy, if those are of interest you, we can dig in those. But in today's world, the other thing which is really different is there are just so many alternatives. I mean, I ran the University of Rochester's endowment for 15 years, and you look at the spread of what you can invest in. I mean, start off with just treasury bills and work your way over here to venture capital. And there are 15 or 20 things in between. Private equity. One of the things we've done quite a bit at my new company is private credit, which we know almost didn't exist in a while back. The banks did it all. Now private credit's a very interesting asset class. The commodities now become an asset class. And I hate to say it, crypto is an asset. They haven't been recognized yet, but you're seeing major players now put crypto into their portfolios. And in America, we're going to have trouble understanding crypto as a currency. But if you're in El Salvador or Argentina or other places like that, crypto has a certain place. So I think it's going to have a problem in the next few years, because when these new situations come into vogue, they do very well. Then there's a period where they don't do very well. If I go back, in when I started the business, the over-the-counter business. Well, I remember I was buying stocks in the over-the-counter, and the guys like me were saying, don't do that. No one should be in the over-the-counter market. And of course, it did very well in the late 60s, and then it had a comeuppance. All right, you go back to people maybe more recognize what happened in the late 90s when you had all the e-companies and Amazon and things like that. Amazon did extremely well in the 90s, but people don't remember, they forget. Amazon went from $100 a share to $10 a share in 2001, 2002. And of course, is now one of the great companies in the world. So so that's why I'm worried about crypto on a near term 2 or 3 year basis where it hasn't come up. And we don't understand crypto completely as to the amount of leverage, the amount of margin that's in crypto yet. So when things get ugly and people start getting margin calls, crypto could have a problem, and it is volatile. So NFTs are the most interesting things I've come across in a long time. And I must say, I'm still a neophyte. I'm dealing with what's nice about NFTs is you get a chance to really talk to a lot of young people and listen to them. Crypto too, by the way, beyond Bitcoin, if you go into Solana or some of these other ones, you have to talk to a really young person. And I go back into the 60s when we had, when things got a little crazy with the conglomerates and things like that. And the concept was you had to have a money manager who was under 40. You couldn't, nobody over 40. When I graduated the business school and they taught the investment management course, it was as much about bonds as it was about stocks. And here we were on our way to, 40 years of declining interest rates. So the change in the business is quite big. It was simpler when I went. I mean, today I wouldn't recommend young people necessarily, unless they really love it, going to these very large financial institutions. Because when I went, to Lehman Brothers or Morgan Stanley at the time, they had $20-30 million worth of capital. And, maybe 300, 400, 500 people. Today they have 30,000, 40,000 people. So, I'm more inclined to go to a place where I get more responsibility. Hedge funds, venture capital, some of these smaller brokerage firms, I think there's more excitement there as far as I'm concerned. And that's really the difference. In my day, you go to almost any small firm and you got a lot of responsibility right away. These big firms, and you can't knock JP Morgan. It's a great firm. Jamie Dimon is running a fabulous shop, and there are parts of it that are very exciting, but it's just a great big place. And I've always been an entrepreneur, finding a place where, I tell young people, forget what they call you. Ask what you're going to do Monday morning. What you physically going to do. And in my book, I describe my decision to become an analyst rather than an investment banker in 1964 when I graduated from college, from business school. They said, well, analysts are gophers and investment bankers are eagles. I remember the guy telling me that who was trying to hire me as an investment banker. I said, what do I really do? He said, I'll show you. He took me down into the basement and there were, no windowed room with 3 other guys there doing work. He said, you work here for 8 years, then you'll be a partner and you'll fly. And I said, and I went out to the Capital Research. Says, what do I do? They said, well, 3 months you'll be on a plane talking to presidents of companies. So I said, make sure what they call you is not important. Well, Kathy, people, nobody wanted to be a broker. It was a horrible experience, or a wealth manager. It's one of the great jobs in the world. You have a chance to meet nice people. You're helping nice people. You have what I call an intellectual video game every day, because everything's changing every day. And you get results. Whether you're helping people or not. I think it's a great experience. With today's information, every day is exciting. And by the way, if I turn my other screen on, you would see I have a full Bloomberg screen. I have 6 Bloomberg screens. It's a disease. I admit it. I just love it. I mean, I was a strategist for over 20 years. I love talking about the market. And it was a great experience because when you talk about it, month to month, a year later, you're either right or wrong. And it's kind of a nice result, or you comb your way through it. I love that experience. And I travel the world talking about the market. I still do. Well, I'm shifting now more to my book because I really my focus is young people. I want to try to get them through that 17 to 25-year-old period, which you just talked about. You can go very wrong during that period, or you can go very right. And just helping them through that get them over a couple of bumps is more important to me. But I still love the stock market. I'm not anywhere near as qualified as I used to be because it was a full-time experience. And Zoom has done wonder for me because I actually formed a bunch of investment groups, which toward 5 or 6 years ago, they started throwing me out of them because I refused to go to the meetings anymore, living in Florida. Now with Zoom, they've invited me back in again. So I'm getting more qualified. So that's a little bit about, I think that's a little bit of an answer. I think it's a difficult more equation. And I think people like yourselves and investment managers are more important than they've ever been. When I went into business, there were individuals who weren't in the business. They were very smart. They knew about industries and companies that could invest on their own. And brokers were, much more knowledgeable in those days. They didn't need as much help. It was a much simpler market. and we didn't have machines.
Yeah.
Machines have changed things quite a bit, and algorithms and index funds, things like that. They've really changed the game. And the index funds didn't exist. And if you look at things, which I've never been a big proponent of index funds, but they've done pretty well. So, if you're not sophisticated and you don't have the time, there are indexes which you can, be involved in. I argued, I have a couple of my friends have been big players in index funds. And I said, there are periods of history though. That's why you need a financial advisor. From 1966 to 1983, 16, 17 years. If you were an index, you made no money. I was around the world talking to people about indexicide. Now, since that time, it's been fabulous. The Dow Jones was 600. It's now, 30,000. So, you could have just stuffed it away. Now, there've been some pretty big bumps in there, but if you close your eyes, you're okay. And, but I find that the individual needs someone to talk to who's spending time on his or her particular problem. That's a little long answer, a short question. Again, my daughter would criticize me.
You know what, though, I completely appreciate it because I share your enthusiasm with it. I turn my screen off, so when I'm doing the show, I don't get distracted because I follow it too. I love it.
Disease. I could see it.
I have the same disease. I love it. I have the same disease of school. And I want to ask you about that because I know one of your essays I read that you talked about why people don't have to go to college or maybe shouldn't go to college, and about the trades and the importance of education. And I almost think it's the definition of education that people have. When you hear it, you think automatically some kind of post-secondary education, whether it's a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. That seems to be what people equate education to. And I always think that education is not so much about the piece of paper you get, but more about what you're learning and how you're using it and how you're sharing it really with other people. And the trades has been a huge conversation lately. And I know you've talked about it and the importance of the trades industry, and that's rating your market with your 17 to 25-year-olds where they're trying to figure out, right, what do I do?
You should exercise your passion, and I can talk about the 4 Ps, but finding what you really want to what you really want to do. And I want to change the word from trades or vocational, but vocational education to me is one of the solutions, one of America's problems, the solution to one of America's big problems, putting people to work. And, this is a mini crusade of mine. And I wrote an article, which nobody would print except the Nantucket paper, but I see more articles coming out now that similar to it, saying it's easier to get an appointment with your doctor than your electrician. And we wrote that article. It's an excellent article. And at the Nantucket Golf Club, where I was a founder, I am founder, member number 1, that kind of stuff. But we now have we used to give 2 academic scholarships a year for the first 15 years. We're now doing 7 vocational scholarships. And for example, we do a chef that wants to go to Johnson Wells. It's $40,000 a year. So it's really worthwhile. But if a young man or a young woman wants to be a chef, he shouldn't be studying Western European history, 14th century Western European history, but to be a chef, or electrician, or a carpenter, or a plumber, or one of the most important things if you think about in the morning, you got a sore arm, it's terrible. But if your computer doesn't work, that's the worst. You need somebody to come and help you. That whole cadre of people that can service computers are very, very important. And it's going to, it changes continually with the different type devices that come out. So I'm a big zealot on vocational education. I've got a couple, and the American Society of Mechanical Engineers is now pushing towards it. And because for every one engineer, you need 4 or 5 technicians. And, they're just as important to the problem as the engineer himself or herself. I'm big on women engineers too. My school is now, we started with no women in the Hajim School of Engineering. We're now up to almost 40%. So I think we scared them away. That was the problem. When I went to school, there wasn't a woman professor or a woman student in engineering. And, I think it's a really big mistake because there are parts of engineering like computer science and biomedical engineering, which actually, I think the women will do better than the men. There's a sort of sense in there. But I really believe in this whole idea of picking an area that you really love and want to go into. And there's no standard thing for everybody. And by the way, as time goes on, there are requirements for new jobs, new vocational jobs that we never had before. We never had anybody service our computers, 20 years ago. We didn't, I mean, iPhone didn't exist 20 years ago. And there's all kinds of, there were diseases now that didn't exist, like Alzheimer's. There'll be a whole series of people required to service that community. Memory units now. They didn't have memory units back then. A friend of mine just unfortunately put his wife in a memory unit. There are specialized people there that have to be trained to handle that kind of problem. So I want people in their late teens to start to think about their passion, think about their talents, think about what they really want to do, and also think about the context of their life. What the next 40 to 50 years, and what's going to happen, and what part of that do they want to play in it? Yeah. And because there are so many areas that you can get into that are more interesting and different and so forth by looking ahead and saying, I want to do that. Not necessarily, college is not necessary. We probably have too many colleges and not enough vocational institutions. I'm involved in the Keys down here. We just constructed an Upper Keys community college. We train first responders, and I'll tell you, there's a woman policeman that gave a talk on a video this year, off the charts, really excited about being, a policeman. I mean, a police woman, and she was just fabulous. In addition, we're training nurses there. We're training marine engineers because we're down here near the water. And these people are just so excited about coming in and doing the work. Most of them, a lot of them are doing it at night because they work and so forth. And so it's very productive. And I think that's the kind of thing we need more of. And I think we're getting more of it. America responds, and they are responding. I've been in contact with a lot of the so-called community colleges, and they're all moving in that direction now. So I think it's exciting. But I'm involved personally in these two, one here in the Keys, one up in Nantucket. And I think it's very satisfying. You watch the kids, they're really excited about what they're doing. They're happy because they're doing something they want to do.
That's awesome. And it's so important. You mentioned the 4 P's, and you talk about it in your book. And the first one was passion. And maybe we can talk about the other 3 P's, because you mentioned the third one, which was hard work.
I think there's only one constant in life. This sounds rather, puffy, but it's your inner voice. And I think you want to develop a conversation with your inner voice that has a vocabulary, and and where you can go back to it. Like, let's take the passions. I think passions, you start with finding your passion, which is an overused word, but it really is your talents, your interests, your context. Where and also things like where you're an only child, where you were the 6th child of 11 children, all that stuff that's in that whole process. But remember the changes. When I was in high school, and you could probably refer to this, math and science, baseball and basketball, and girls. That was my passion. Go to college, it morphs. Yes. I played freshman baseball and basketball. That morphed into intramural sports and extracurricular activities, which became very important. Math and science merged into engineering, and then chemical engineering. Yep. And then later on in life, my passion moved from chemical engineering, or the engineering process, into finance and finally management. And shockingly, my passion, actually, I discovered my passion in college. I didn't know it was my passion, but I look back on it. Again, writing the book helped me. I started a humor magazine when I was a junior. I was taking physical and organic chemistry. I was crazy. But Rochester was a place where fun went to die. It was a very serious place. And I wanted to do something, make people laugh. And the president was against it. The provost was against it. The librarian was against it. But I created this humor magazine. I put 30 people together, and we did this thing. What happened basically is I found out my passion was putting people together to solve a problem, to produce a product, to answer a question, to get a solution. Excited me. And I found I had a further passion. I got a terrific kick out of having people exceed their own expectations, do more than they thought they could do. I sort of repeat that. My passion was putting people together to solve a problem, create a product, start a program, find an unsatisfied need, find a latent demand, that kind. But then when I got into it, taking someone and helping them exceed their own expectations. By the way, by doing that, I found out later in life, I exceeded my own expectations. So that was my passion. Now, second one, P, is principles. I think early on, most of us get our principles from our religion or from our parents. It's, what are the rules you want to follow? What are the lines you won't cross? When you're in that early stage, you can talk about that and think about it. When you get in the game, the real game, and it's happening very quickly in the morning, something comes in. You have those moral moral situations established, you can make decisions more easily. And I was taught my first, rule was set by the nuns. And it may be the only rule you need is be doing to others. It was very important. That was a rule. And I learned it with the golden ruler. I can still feel it. They let you know that you learned this. The second rule, which I had to learn, was the second golden rule, which is he who has the gold rules. I was very poor and I wanted to have, a better life. And I was going to basically seek financial resources. And that lasted until my mid 40s when I traded it in for freedom. Freedom became more important to me than financial resources. By that time, I didn't have a lot of money, but I had enough financial resources that I was satisfied. And instead of going to when I left Lehman Brothers, instead of going to another fancy large firm, a lot of money, I went to a little tiny firm where I was going to be the boss and I would have freedom to do what I wanted to do. Greatest decision I ever made. But I traded the principal in. And, I found that, and all through my life, I collected principles. When you get one on Bloomberg, you stick it up on your wall. And one that really serviced me well was you can accomplish almost anything if you don't worry about who gets the credit. And I used that for years. I always, I didn't care. And then later on in life, I found out I went even a step further. I deflected credit. No matter what you do in life, someone else has helped you. And when someone says, Ed, you did a great job, I say, no, Barbara, she was the one who did it, or Joan, or Sam. And it really makes you feel good, and it makes Sam feel good, or Joan, or Barbara. And I did that almost. You'll see in the book a couple of times when they were going to try to, be nice to me. I said, always think about deflecting credit. Then finally, and I can go through lots of principles. I had them up on my wall and everything. But the final one today, I adopted this 20 years ago, is gratitude. People ask me at my age, how are you? They want to hire you. They want an organ recital. This hurts and that hurts. I just say I'm grateful because it's true. That's the most important principle to me, is being grateful. A friend of mine once stopped when he was 70, made a list of 44 people and went around and thanked each one of them, which I think is his book called This Is the Moment. I give out to everybody because I think that I try regularly to thank people. Because in my age, they disappear. And it's very sad if you haven't really gone back and said, thanks, Bill, it was really nice to be up in Maine at your place, 3 years ago, or been great having you as a friend all these years. And this guy did that. And I gave the book out to all my trustees at Rochester when I was the chair. But the third P is partners. Find someone to love. But without Barbara, I wouldn't be here today. I love her more than yesterday and less than tomorrow. That's a fact. And she did a lot of work on the book. She's just my real partner. Find someone who you can support, who will support you, who will pay attention to you. Someone you can share your life with. I have found that I'm only as good as the people I surround myself with. Good partners, you look in the book, I succeeded. No partners, the wrong partners, I failed. Very important. Partners are key. And in today's world, collaboration is absolutely necessary. You must have, and if you have a minute, I can really go too long again, but 3 kinds of partners. Find partners who can do things that you can't do. In the case of the Humor magazine, I could draw cartoons. I found a guy. Find things that find partners who can do things better than you can do them. Then find partners, this is the most important one. Find people who do things that you do really well, but you don't want to do. If you find those 3 partners or partners in one person, you end up doing things that you do well, that you like doing. And that's the perfect life. And then at Lehman Brothers, I was introduced to a 6'5" graduate from Dartmouth. And he did all the things. He did things I couldn't do. He did things better than I could do. He did things I did well, and he wanted to do them. And he spent 35 years with me, and he was my real partner. So it's partners, and partners, by the way, run through the whole thing. And they're different. They're different partners when you're in a business than when you're at an Edie Mossener institution like a school. The mentality of partners have to be different. In business, you make some decisions, let's do it. Boy, in a school, you got to get consensus, and you have to have people who have that kind of patience and so forth. Then finally, as partners, find a friend. I tell the kids, look to your left, find someone you want to spend your whole life with. I could spend the rest of the afternoon on Dick Wiedemeyer, who was my friend at Rochester. It really almost forced me to go to business school. And until he died, he used to regularly worry about me. But anyway, plans. Plans are something, I was cornered the other day by a senior at one of the high schools in colleges I was talking to. He said, you said a lot of things. That give me one thing to do. And I said, write down what you want to do. Write it down. what you want to do and how you think you might get there. And I know plans will change, but when you come to that turn in the road, if you've got that written plan, you'll make the turn quicker. Turn in the road won't be the end of the road for you if you've got it written down. And then while you're writing this down, think about what's going to happen in your lifetime. Think about the trends, the waves, the cycles in your lifetime, and basically try to catch a wave or a cycle. I have tons of yellow pads that basically have these things on it, constantly trying to find, in our business is finding a trend. And by the way, it's wonderful. I found a bunch of trends when I was in brokerage business. I had to add the right analysts in the right area and so forth. And I found a big wave. I came in to become the chairman of a firm in 1983 when the stock market was, when Dow Jones was 600. And in over 20 years, I grew it more than 25 fold, I guess, 20 times. 20. Everybody says, you did a great job. I did a great job. The stock market was up 10 times during that period. I had the wind at my back. So what I wish young people is write your plans, try to get your wind at your back. Those are the 4 Ps. And it does avail, if you do that and you pull it off, you'll end up with the 5th P, which is not in my book, which is purpose. And that's really if you find your passion, and by the way, if you can marry your passion to a wave, boy, you really got it. You find something you really like to do that's really going to happen during your lifetime, then you're really home free. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, by the way, making money. A friend of mine who was a surgeon at the University of Rochester found that the wave that he found was basically spinal operations in Ethiopia. And he is in love with what he's doing, and he is changing Africa, because anybody that's got a real spinal problem, they come to him in Ethiopia, and he has pictures of his kids, thousands of kids that he's taken care of over the last 20, 25 years. And so it's each person to his own. I found this thing in the brokerage business, and I loved it, and I got a wave, and it took me where I wanted to go and allowed me to bring closure to my business. But that's sort of the 4 Ps. If you'll give me more time, I'll give you the 4 buckets of life, which have to, the 4 Ps have to be poured into, and that's self, family, work, and community. Community is my word for giving back. And that's the juggling act that we all have. Think about it. You're juggling self with your family, with work, and giving back comes a little later. First you spend all your time on self initially, then you get into family, which is what's all that's left after when everything's said and done. Work is, you spend almost too much time on it, but it's something that captures you and you have to do it. And then community, giving back, is where you maybe get your greatest satisfaction. But it's a juggling act. And my 3rd book, if it ever comes out, the 3rd chapter is that balance is bull. You're never in balance. You're always out of balance. And if you recognize that, then you're ahead. That's why I tell businessmen, if you work too hard, you're not spending enough time with your family. If you have a sickness in your family and so forth, your work will start to suffer. I mean, just to be very nasty, when I get a young man or somebody gets divorced, he's no good or she's no good for 12 to 18 months because they're focused on that rather than their work. And in the community, if you're the chairman of the board of the University of Rochester and you got some problems, you're not allowed to work. I actually closed my hedge fund because I felt I had to spend full time on it. I really didn't work much during the 8 years I was chairman because it was made 70 trips to Rochester. My wife said to me, for better or for worse, but not for Rochester. So she didn't go. Anyway, long answer to a wonderful question.
Oh, it's an hour's not enough with you. I can see for sure. We only have a couple minutes left on the show. I want to get your contact information in so that people can follow you or contact you, or I know you with your website, and I know you're on LinkedIn. What's the best way for people to really get a hold of you or see you or follow you?
The very complicated website is Ed Hajim. I'm the only Hajim in the world besides my children. Although my daughter thinks she's found some guy in a prison in Morocco, but Ed Hajim, Hajim. It's not Hajim, which sounds much better, but unfortunately it's not. At gmail.com, or more importantly, it's a www.edhajim. I think that's what it is. It's my website. Yep. And the book can be found on Amazon, On the Road Less Traveled, and by me, and it's on Amazon and Simon & Schuster. So I'm contactable. I did join. I stayed away from all of social media because I thought that it was a distraction. I have joined LinkedIn, So I'm on LinkedIn now, and I'm getting too many hits. So it's just, you have to allocate your time to certain kinds of things. And I probably was a little bit of a troglodyte staying off social media, but it allowed me not to flip to Facebook every night. My wife is on Facebook, so I get it anyway, so it's not bad.
So
it's
Ed, you mentioned-
www.edhajim, and I think that gets you there, I think.
Perfect. We'll share that for sure. So what's next for you? Like, your book is truly inspiring. It's an amazing story, and I would not be surprised if I see it on the big screen someday, because I think it's amazing. What's next? You mentioned maybe another book or two. So
what's next, and very funny, on my 85th year, my party at 85th year, Barbara put on, she gave out hats from the Nantucket Golf Club with what's next on it. And what's next on it is this book and things that this book will derive from it. The second book will be a book on the 4 Ps. I really want to, it's an allegory. As a young man goes to an island, he's taken there by a captain and a navigator, which could be his mother and his father or somebody. He arrives at the island. Out of the island bushes comes an older man, Archimedes. His name is Marcus, and they walk through the island. They walk to the village of passions, and it's filled with all kinds of passions, including bad passions. And then they climb a mountain into the village of principles. They spend time looking at the village. Then they come down the mountain into the village of partners, and finally the village of plans. And the conversation with the two of them goes on all the time. And it basically is the conversation with yourself, really. You know, if you had a chance as a young person, if you could talk to yourself as an old person, you really be way ahead of the ball game. So that's the second book. I'm excited about it because, you know, even it's a giggle, but if I have enough money and enough time, I'll make a video game out of it. It'll be the first video game where nobody gets shot.
Yeah.
I can see young people going to the Village of Passions and spending, you know, like they do with Dungeons and Dragons, you know, going through the house of music, the house of chemistry, the house of carpentry, whatever else. I have these houses, and then obviously we can't have too many of them in the book, but think about a big village filled with units that have all people in that unit do the same thing, and you could go in there and talk to them and see what they do and so forth and so on. So the same principles. We have a room full of philosophy, religion, and, you know, different channels where people go down into those and stay there and sit there and listen to the different religions and different you know, philosophies and so forth. In plans, we have a big tower that you go into and you study the trends in the beginning of time. You know, it's corny, but it's kind of fun. And the third book will be, I'm going to tear apart. I've written already. It's 32 chapters, each of them 5 or 6 pages a piece. I'm not sure it'll be the same, but I'm going to take each lesson that I think I learned and be more explicit about it. For example, one of my big lessons is very important: is never be a victim. You ask me, why do kids go down? They become victims. You know, I can't make it. No, take the energy in being a victim and go forward. I'll give you a specific big business example. At Lehman Brothers, I'm not embarrassed to say I did a fabulous job. I turned around the brokerage business, securities business. The boss and I didn't get along, kicked me out of there, put me into a dead end area called money management. I raised, you know, $8 billion in 2.5 years, and he kicked me out of there because I grew it too fast. He just didn't like me. Now, I wouldn't support him for throwing out Mr. Peterson. Pete Peterson was a terrific man, and he was a CEO. So he kicked me out. And I could have fought him because I was the chairman of 6 mutual funds. I had outside boards, including one New York Stock Exchange board. I could have gone to the press. I could have hired a lawyer, but I left and I found my dream job, which was to be a CEO of a small investment bank. But it took a lot of energy for not fighting him, but take it forward. And the same thing when you have setbacks. And I got rejected by every fraternity my freshman year. My sophomore year, every fraternity was trying to get me to become a pledge. So, you know, you got to take that anger, you got to take that conviction, victimize, and take it forward and really push it. Now you do you're still angry. I mean, when you have a bad background, you are angry because you have something built in. When you look at other people, they have families, they have, you know, they learn to swim, they learn to ride a bicycle. You have anger, and it comes out.
Ed, we have 15 seconds left, and I can't believe how fast it goes. But I want to thank you so much. I am really looking forward to your next book.
Is the whole hour gone already?
It's already. We're there.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible. Thank you so much.
Thank you for choosing to listen to Financially Speaking Radio Show. Kathy Cook Noble will return next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by making the choices that bring you all that you desire.